Who wins the quarterback battle in Cleveland? We'll tell you who you should be rooting for next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Michael Fabiano. You can follow him on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. You can also check out all of his great work over on SI. And on today's show, we're taking a look at some training camp battles that we are excited to watch and you should be paying attention to in your dynasty leagues. And let's start with maybe the biggest one across the NFL, the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation. It's Joe Flacco versus Kenny Pickett versus Dylan Gabriel versus Shedeur Sanders versus whatever Deshaun Watson still is at this point in his career.
I don't even factor him anymore. Right?
No,
I just don't factor him in. I mean, he's to me, yeah.
Why is he even still on the roster?
Yeah. So, I have some friends that are close to the Browns, and they all sort of agree that either Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco is going to be the starter, and whoever maybe isn't on the roster. Dylan Gabriel, though, if you read the reports in terms of the work in minicamp, I mean, he was the one who was working with the first team, and Shedeur Sanders was like working down the depth chart. Now, some people out there reported that Sanders looked pretty good, but it's amazing to me that he went from being a top 10 projected pick in the NFL draft, Mel Kiper, and most people, to legitimately like almost a work in progress type of player who is battling for a roster spot. It's crazy. When you also look at, Dylan Gabriel, they picked him in the third round. Sanders was a fifth round pick. So obviously the Browns are higher on Dylan Gabriel than they are on Shedeur Sanders. They were in the draft and they probably are now. I think the Browns are hoping that, Gabriel's the one who emerges as their long-term starter. Again, at least if you read the reports, he was getting first team reps in minicamp, and Shedeur Sanders was not. And then I think you also, because I love to talk about the historical side of the NFL, you've also got to look as a dynasty manager at what the Browns have done in the past in terms of quarterbacks that they have drafted. Now, this was part of the reason why I avoided Zach Wilson at all costs when the Jets drafted him second overall. Why? Because historically the Jets don't draft well at the quarterback position and the quarterbacks falter. Zach Wilson followed in line. The Browns have only drafted one quarterback out of 20. And we're talking about in the Super Bowl era who went on to average more than 16.6 fantasy points per game in a single season. That was Baker Mayfield in 2018, who averaged 17.2 points per game. Now we're going back to 1966 here, folks. Only two, Mayfield and Brian Sipe, good old number 17, have scored more than 200 fantasy points in a single season among Browns quarterbacks who were drafted by the franchise. And only three, Mayfield, Brian Sipe, and Bernie Kosar, Cowboys fans remember him, have averaged more than 15.5 fantasy points per game after being drafted by the Browns. And I'm talking about while playing for the Browns. These players have gone on and done better things outside of Cleveland, especially, a guy like Baker Mayfield. But historically speaking, the Browns are just as bad as like the Jets and the Bears when it comes to drafting quarterbacks who go on to not produce statistically. So keep that in mind. And, some people may not think the trends matter. I like to look at them. And if they do, they do. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But when you're looking in the Dynasty League about drafting a Dylan Gabriel or drafting a Shedeur Sanders, Sanders has more of the name value and the pop kind of thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to even be the third string quarterback on the Cleveland Browns to begin this upcoming season. Personally, for me, selfishly, I'd rather have Joe Flacco as a starter this season. It has nothing to do with dynasty. It's got to do with the ancillary pieces around him. I like Cedric Tillman. You like to see Jerry Jeudy get those opportunities. You like to see David Njoku get those opportunities because, if it's Dylan Gabriel under center, or even a Kenny Pickett, who has been a complete bust in the NFL, that hurts the value of everybody in that offense in the passing game.
So I agree with you. I think if you are a dynasty fan and you've got Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku, Harold Fannin, Quinshon Judkins, you want it to be Joe Flacco, at least for this year, or at least to start the year, because I think he does give you at least a baseline level of production. Now, I think your offense is always going to be a little capped with Joe Flacco, but I do think he's still good enough to keep those guys afloat, right? So I think that's what we're hoping for. And honestly, I think it's good for both Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders to not have to play right away. Like, allow them some time.
Yeah.
Caught up to the NFL. And that kind of leads me to my next point. These are 3rd and 5th round picks at quarterback. Like, it's very rare that 3rd and 5th round picks at quarterback start right away. Sometimes, a lot of times these guys just don't play at all during the rookie years. Like, so let's remember that most of the time when you're drafting quarterbacks late 3rd round, like Dylan Gabriel was, and 5th round for Shedeur Sanders, you're viewing those guys as, could they potentially be our high-end backups down the road? Like, honestly, that's it.
It's amazing. It is amazing the free fall that Sanders went through. It really is, because I didn't see now there were some mock drafts that had him falling out of the 1st round as we got closer and closer to the draft. But 5th round, I don't know what team saw, or if there's some, I don't know, with the whole Deion Sanders kind of thing, if there's some stink on Shedeur, ego, etc. But it is amazing that we're here talking about Shedeur Sanders as maybe not even being draftable in dynasty.
Yeah, well,
because of the uncertainty around his position and status with the Browns.
I think a lot of it was once he got past like the top 50 picks in the draft, now you're viewing him as a backup quarterback. And we know NFL teams don't like to have a noisy backup quarterback. And I'm not saying that Shedeur is noisy. I'm saying that the media coverage is, right? This has been the problem with several other big name quarterbacks. You're almost too big of a star to be a backup. I think, honestly, the best example of this is Cam Newton. Like, Cam Newton could have played a lot longer in the NFL as a backup, but teams don't want a former Heisman Trophy winner, former MVP as a backup quarterback, because they don't want it to overshadow your starting quarterback, right? I think for Shedeur, he's in a battle now, not only to try to win the quarterback job, he's in a battle to make the roster. Like, if he does not have a good training camp, because we see quarterbacks get cut all the time who are day 3 picks. We see players who are 5th round picks get cut all the time. I think he's going to make the roster. But from a dynasty perspective, right now we're seeing him being drafted as QB 29 overall, ahead of quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, Jalen Milroe, Aaron Rodgers, Daniel Jones, Tyler Shuck. Honestly, that feels high.
Very high. I mean, obviously Aaron Rodgers, I know he's got one more year, so I don't know that I necessarily want to, go in that direction. But, some of those quarterbacks, especially Jalen Milroe, I'd much rather have him than Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah. Now, I think for the weapons on the offense, the Jerry Judys, the Tillmans, the Njokus, if you're rooting between the 2 quarterbacks, Gabriel and Shedeur, I think you would rather have Shedeur, just because he is a more pocket passer. He's accurate.
Right.
He throws with anticipation. But if you're looking at the quarterback that might provide the most dynasty value, it's probably Dylan Gabriel, just because he's a better runner, 1,200 career rushing yards. And remember, that factors in sacks coming out of school. So even more rushing yards than that. I do think he just has a little bit more mobility, and that could lead to more fantasy points. So from a dynasty perspective, you're probably rooting for Dylan Gabriel here.
And, Sanders, you go and look back at his collegiate numbers in terms of rushing yards. I mean, he's in the negatives.
Yeah.
I think he rushed for 117 negative yards, or you know what I'm talking about.
And again, that includes sack yards. So he's more mobile than what that is, but he's not a mobile quarterback.
But you're right, exactly. Like, he takes a ton of sacks, and that's a problem for Sanders. It was in college. The career path is going to be fascinating for him because of where it was and where it is now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation. So again, we want to see Joe Flacco win this, all things considered. Allow these guys to sit, develop, learn the offense. And we talked about the trends really quickly. I understand all of it, but I do think Kevin Stefanski is a pretty good coach. He's a 2-time coach of the year. He got Baker Mayfield to play some of the best football of his career. Again, there's the 3rd and 5th round picks, so the expectations are low, but I wouldn't be surprised if eventually Cleveland figures this thing out.
It is amazing though that we're not even talking about the guy with the guaranteed $230 million contract in this, and we're talking about 4 other quarterbacks ahead of him. And yeah, I mean Stefanski certainly is a plus. Like we put that into the rookies, positive column. Sanders and Gabriel, and just in terms of having a coach that's an offensive mind who certainly will help in their development. But there's not a whole heck of a lot to like about either one of these guys in Dynasty as we speak right now.
No. All right, let's talk about the Jacksonville running back situation, because there's 3 names there competing for snaps in what we think could be one of the highest powered offenses in the NFL. Who wins out? We'll tell you next. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets for concerts shouldn't be hard. I've tried to do it. It's impossible. It's not fun at all. The process is terrible, but that's where Game Time steps in. Live music should be about making memories and not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever before. Prices on the app actually go down the closer that you get to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And if you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you. Plus, you can see a panoramic seat view in the app before you buy, just making you feel way more comfortable about the entire process. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing some training camp battles that we are eager to see here in the next really couple of weeks. Let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars running back situation. You have Travis Etienne, the former first-round pick, Tank Bigsby, the between-the-tackle grinder, and then you have Byshell Tootin, who the Jags took in the 4th round, the speedster from Virginia Tech. How do you see this shaking out?
So the first thing I did, and I did this earlier in the offseason, you just kind of figure out what the hell happened to Etienne last season. Because, I mean, legitimately, his second year, he was phenomenal. He was in the top 5 among running backs in fantasy points. He was very highly touted last season. So you go back and look at the stats, because that's what we do, Marcus, right? I mean, his touches went from 19.1 per game to 12.6. His points went from 16.6 per game to 8.7. His yards per carry was over 5 in his rookie year. The last 2 years, it's been under 4. And then you go back and compare some of the, the deeper analytics, right? Some of the deeper stats. In 2023, when he was highly successful, I mean, his yards after contact were very good. He was the RB9. Rushes of 10 plus yards, he was the RB21. Expected rushing yards, he was the RB2. Now, here's where we should have looked a little bit deeper into Etienne, because while he was very good in terms of gaining the expected rushing yards, his rushing yards over expected was at -77. He was the RB60, which means that he didn't do much more than what was expected of him. He didn't break tackles. He didn't get to the next level. He just didn't do much more than what was expected based on the blocking. And that was something that was overlooked because his stats from a fantasy standpoint were so good. And now you go and compare that to this past season. His yards after contact, 480. That's RB35. Now, a lot of this has to do with a decrease in touches. But did the decrease in touches result from having his metrics sort of fall a little bit? His rushing performances, 10 plus yards. He only had 16. Expected rushing yards, RB29. So he went from RB2 in expected rushing yards to RB29 last season. And then his yards over expected were -43, which is RB 53. Not good. He also went from breaking 43 tackles in 2023 to only 7 last season. So, like, all these things show you Travis Etienne has got a problem with being as good as expected, but not exceeding that. And you, as a fantasy manager who is looking for players who score points, want players who are going to exceed what is expected of them. And we did not see that from Travis Etienne even 2 years ago. And last season, it all kind of fell apart. Then you look at Tank Bigsby. I mean, some of his metrics were better than Travis Etienne. You look at yards after contact last year, he was at 669, which was better than Etienne. He was the RB22. Rushes of 10 plus yards, he was the RB22. Expected rushing yards, he was the RB21. Expected yards over expectation, he had 124. He was the RB12. So Tank Bigsby, when he got the football, he exceeded expectations in terms of being a runner. Etienne didn't do that 2 years ago. He didn't do that last year. And maybe, Marcus, that's part of the reason why Bigsby was getting more burn last year. And now when you bring in Rootin' Tootin' into that mix, then suddenly you've got a lot of confusion. They're all very young, obviously. Etienne is still in the prime of his career. Maybe this is the final year of his time in Jacksonville. We're not sure. I'm sure Trevor Lawrence will be wanting to keep him around because they're friends. They played together at Clemson. But the future of this backfield is very much up in the air. And when you look at the ADP data, Etienne is the RB24. So fantasy manager and dynasty leagues are still going after him. What's interesting to me is that Bajal Tootin is the RB31. Tank Bigsby is at 46.
Yeah.
And so at 46, I will take Tank Bigsby all day long and twice on Sunday, because I'm not necessarily convinced that Bajal Rootin' Tootin' is going to be the featured back for the Jaguars for years to come. I mean, the guy's already had fumbling problems. We know this. So Bigsby might be the get in Dynasty here based on the value.
Yeah, and I think Bigsby's role projects as a between the tackle guy that gets the short yardage work. And if you're going to be throwing the ball a lot, maybe that just sets up for was that 2022 Jamal Williams had all those touchdowns. Like, he's not overly dynamic and he's just a fine runner, but he got into an offense that loaded him up on short yardage touchdowns and he became very fantasy relevant. I don't know if that's probably a best case scenario for Tank Bigsby, but I don't think it's all that unreasonable. One of the things that I've been looking at, Fabs, is who is the running back that's going to play on the passing downs, or when they are in 3 receiver sets, who's going to be that running back next to Trevor Lawrence? And I can't really figure it out because last year, Travis Etienne was the second worst pass blocking running back in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. He had a pass blocking grade of 19.3. The only running back that was worse was Devon Achane in Miami. Okay. So you would think, oh, okay, well, that sets up Tank Bigsby to be, that guy. Tank Bigsby, 25.3. He was the 7th worst pass blocking running back. So not much better.
Yeah.
You go to receiving. Tank Bigsby, the worst receiving grade among all running backs in the NFL last year, 36.8, while Travis Etienne actually performed pretty well there. He ended up finishing as a top 15 running back in the passing game. I don't expect Bajal Tootin, a rookie running back from Virginia Tech who really never had to pass block in college, to get that role. It's going to be one of those two guys. And my guess is it's just going to default to Etienne because he's the better receiver and he has more experience. And that's probably going to be the guy that's on the field the most, because if you can't protect Trevor Lawrence, you're probably not going to be on the field.
And also, you got to keep in mind this off. I mean, Liam Cohen's going to be the man calling the plays. Things are going to be changing in Jacksonville. He's said some good things about Etienne in the offseason during mini camps. Again, I'm probably trying to avoid this backfield at all costs. And because it's going to be so confusing and the future is very difficult to predict here. But
don't you think figuring out this backfield is going to be one of the most important parts for fantasy? Because I think if Trevor Lawrence stays healthy and you've got Liam Cohen, that this could be an offense that way outperforms expectations. And those are generally the running backs that you want, the guys that aren't being valued as top 20 running backs that end up turning into one.
But that's why I like Bigsby at RB46. because that is, I mean, listen, he's young. That could be like stealing. And what happens if this is Etienne's last season in Jacksonville? And what if Bigsby is the guy moving forward? I think that's a more likely scenario than Tootin taking over that role, basically jumping two guys.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to go after a Jaguars running back, I'm going to go after the guy who's going to be the best value for me. And right now, that's Bigsby.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think Bigsby is somebody that I have on almost every single dynasty team because I do think he's a very good inside runner. And you're right, he's the cheapest, so why not go out and get him? All right, we haven't talked about the Cowboys enough. Let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys running back situation going into training camp. Who ends up becoming RB1 in Dallas? We'll tell you next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, let's talk about the Cowboys running back situation because much like Jacksonville, we expect this to be one of the league's best offenses. Whenever Dak Prescott's healthy and CeeDee Lamb's on the field, this has been the highest scoring offense in the league. They added George Pickens. They added Tyler Booker. But who's the running back here, Fabs?
I don't know that we do have one that's somebody we can bank on long term. I think for this upcoming season, it's Javonte Williams, but Javonte Williams, and listen, admittedly, I liked him coming out of North Carolina, but after he had that knee injury, I mean, he just hasn't really been the same back. And you look at like some of the PFF rushing grades over the last 3 years, I mean, 64.6, right? He hasn't been the same player. And the Cowboys brought him in on a 1-year deal. Now he's still, he's still young, like he's still in the prime of his career, but he's not met expectations, not even close. And so Rico Donnell, I think, is a better running back than Javonte Williams. I think the Cowboys running back situation is worse than it was last season. If you're looking for a guy who can maybe help you this season, then maybe it's Javonte Williams. He's the RB41 based on the ADP. And so, I mean, that's obviously not very highly touted. If he's an RB4 type, RB5. So in that scenario, sure. But if you're in Dynasty, I mean, you're probably more looking towards Jaden Blue, who's obviously much younger. He's the RB45, so he's only being drafted a few spots behind Javonte Williams. But, I mean, Jaden Blue's a satellite back, right? I mean, he played behind, Bijan and Jonathan Brooks, and then last year he played behind Trey Wisner. And so, people hear, Jaden Blue, and he's in a great situation, which, on the surface, I guess he is, but, he's not a featured back type. He's 5'9", 196 for crying out loud. And so, could he be? I know you've compared him to
Lance Dunbar.
Dunbar. Yes. Thanks
North
for catching
Texas,
that point.
Texas
Right.
legend,
I mean, you're hoping that he's Darren Sproles, but he's not going to be. He's just not going to be. It's going to be some sort of committee in Dallas. So in the long term, I mean, based on what they have right now, I mean, you probably want to go after Jaden Blue. If you're looking at a player who is maybe going to help you more this season, maybe that's Javonte Williams. We've seen interviews with Jaden Blue, and he talks about his route running and how he can catch the ball. And yes, he's a really good pass catcher. He had 368 yards receiving and 6 touchdowns. This past season with the Longhorns, he can get the job done as a receiver, but as an all-around running back who's going to run between the tackles, who's going to pass protect, that's just not Jaden Blue. And I mean, listen, I don't know why the Cowboys have gone away from having that stud running back, right? They didn't even look into Derrick Henry, which pisses me off. Jerry Jones, I'm sorry. Right? Maybe he wouldn't have been as good because it's the Cowboys. I have no idea. But they bring in Miles Sanders, who is, I'm sorry, I'm sure he's a wonderful human being. He's not a good running back in the NFL. He had an RB15 finish with the Philadelphia Eagles, who is probably the most attractive offense in the entire league for any running back to run behind that offensive line at that point. And then he went to Carolina. He was terrible. I mean, they gave Chuba Hubbard a big extension after signing Miles Sanders. He's one of their big free agent acquisitions. and the guy was lingering on the bench. And what, the Cowboys now expect him to suddenly become the Miles Sanders from a couple of years ago? No, it's not going to happen. It's a bummer because, as Cowboys fans, you remember Tony Dorsett and Zeke and obviously the great Emmitt Smith. The Cowboys had some really great running backs. And now it's at a point where Jerry Jones just almost doesn't care, because Rico Dowdle was okay last season, but certainly not on the level of some elite running back that the Cowboys have had in the past. And from a fantasy perspective, I just don't know which direction to go in. If you're looking for a 1-year fix, maybe Javonte Williams because then RB4 for you, but long term, I guess you're going blue. But Marcus, I just don't see him as a guy that's going to really contribute from a fantasy standpoint on a consistent basis.
So I don't love any of these running backs. And I even think Jaden Blue is only going to be a part-time player in the NFL. If I had to pick one here, I actually think it's Miles Sanders, who's looked the best during OTAs and mini camps. And I know, but I think the thing with Sanders is he still has at least a little bit of athleticism and juice left, where I've got some major doubts about Javonte Williams. Like I just don't think he's got much left. I think what you're rooting for here, Fabs, is I think you're rooting for the Cowboys running back situation to look really bad in training camp and in the preseason, because if that were to happen, then I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at trades, whether it's like a Zach Charbonnet or a Kenneth Walker, or maybe they try to trade for someone like Breece Hall, or you name the guy, right?
Jerry Jones runs this team, right?
He did trade for George Pickens, though, right?
Yeah, I know. But I mean,
they make a billion trades. I will say that's one of the things they do.
But yeah,
they make a million different
crap. Moves. Trey Lance and freaking Jonathan Mingo. Okay, go ahead.
What if it's something like Ramondre Stevenson? And I get like Ramondre's not a big name, but he would be an upgrade over whatever they have on the roster. I could see them flipping like a late, like a mid day 3 pick for Ramondre, and all of a sudden we feel much, much better about the running back situation.
But you are answering the question of whether or not we trust anybody in the current state of the Cowboys backfield.
I don't.
You want somebody else in there, and that speaks volumes.
Yes, I think their leading rusher is not on the roster right now. But if I had to put a chip down on one of the running backs that currently is, I would say Miles Sanders. Jaden Blue worked exclusively with the second and third team during OTAs and mini camps. I think they think he's probably still a year away. Sanders at least had some juice left, but I don't feel great about it.
Where is the juice? He was juiceless in Carolina.
Honestly, it might just look like he's got juice compared to Javonte,
he was so bad that they gave Chuba Hubbard, who was already on the roster when they signed him, a big extension, and they drafted a guy in the second round coming off an ACL.
I know. Listen, I get it. It's not great either way. That's what I say. You're rooting for them to have just look as bad as possible in training camp preseason, so they go out and get somebody else. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Fabs on Twitter at Michael_Fabiano. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here on Monday.